what I hear coming out of your dialectical process really is the life of your own life, and that's the other great thing about the way you've written the book. You've got stories of your own experiences and the things that have happened in your own life that transcend any kind of, formulaic theoretical exposition. So I thought your ideas section was really, the whole book was very, very successful in that sense, but the ideas section really brought that home for me. And the other key theme that brought home to me was this notion that we're all sort of struggling with modernity. What is modernity? What is modernism? Where's the baby in the bathwater? It's not just everything is good about modernism, everything is bad about modernism, any more than about new urbanism or anything else. How do we tease through that? And again, that's not a formulaic process. That's something that we have to get into the mud, so to speak, and struggle with, right? And that's your story of how you've done that. Does that feel like I'm on target with you?
Yeah, I think there in some ways the ideas section is shaped in opposition to two people whom I respect greatly. One is my friend Peter Calthorpe, and the other is my friend Anders Dwani.
Right.
And that I've had this argument with Peter over and over again, is that when knowledge is reduced to the knowable, or when knowledge is reduced to the certain, it leaves out almost all of knowledge.
Right.
And the idea that if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist.
Right.
And I said, well, Peter, it is true that there's fewer particulates per million grams of whatever in New York than there is in Atlanta, but Gershwin and Woody Allen had other ways of measuring the magic of New York. And that he said, well, yeah, there's that stuff too. And Andreas, who is in a long tradition of geniuses who set out to think everything about everything. And if he only has just a few more minutes, he'll have it all figured out.
Our friend Christopher Alexander's in that
Chris
too.
Alexander is very, very much. Chris Alexander, at the age of 26, wrote a brilliant paper called "The City Is Not a Tree."
If you don't know it, it's a great
classic.
paper. Robert Campbell said it was a seminal moment in his
It
life.
is, and it explains why the city is more complex than one can understand.
Right.
And that any attempt to fully understand the city is reductive and misses the important meanings it has. Christopher Alexander spent the next 50 years of his life escaping from the wisdom of "The City Is Not a Tree."
From his own wisdom.
Which he said basically, the city is more complex than the cognitive powers of anyone but me. and I'll get it figured out pretty soon.
Well, Charles Jinks said to me once, the thing about Chris is that he talks bottom up, but he acts top down. So maybe that's what he was trying to do, is as so many 20th century architects have done, trying to get the system, get the process that we need to solve the problem.
That figures everything out.
That figure everything out, right.
For everyone.
Right. You have a quote in the book about a reference to Socrates deliberately not writing down any of his philosophy because he thought it was always, in the context of the moment of discovery, of experiencing. It wasn't until Plato came along and wrote it all down that it became a system and a document. I thought that was a great.
Well, Le Corbusier made the great mistake of the Athens Charter.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
Yeah.
Right, which is a phenomenally powerful document, and yet it has done such destruction to our world in terms of, absolutely putting a place for everything and everything in its place, and all the things that happen.
I think Jim Scott actually misses the power of Le Corbusier.
Right,
is-
and you talk about Le Corbusier was a complex figure.
very complex
And
and, very funny and very
Yeah,
sexy and stylish and
Brilliant painter.
painter and witty and
so it's possible to make
all
these
these
tragic
level-
mistakes
all
when
these
you're-
levels of charm
Yeah,
that made you accept his dogmatism.
yeah. And this is what I love about your book is that you're showing these complex layerings of, mistakes and insights, and it's not a simple story, which is
Yeah.
a little hard to tell in the sense, that it doesn't fit on a bumper sticker, and we live in a bumper sticker age, and yet that's where the richness is. That's
Yeah.
where. So
No, you
read the
work
book.
in a completely different way. So you don't. That's so refreshing, actually. That you don't take sides, but you take sides.
Well, he's taking the sides
Yeah,
as
but in a
he's
different
going.
way.
Yeah,
Yeah, in a
not
different
not
way.
in a sort of a doctrinaire way, right?
Yeah,
I would
and not
say.
about who is right and wrong, or it's more about what is fruitful or not fruitful. Because you deliver also critique. You have like a complex relationship to new urbanism and the Congress of CNU, and you also elaborate on that in the book. And I think it's interesting that it's not that you tell me as a reader that no, I should think this way, but you more show what on which level the problem is with. Well, you talked about Andrus Joanny,
Well,
and what you call the ossification of an idea, which can happen anywhere. It can
Just like Le
happen-
Corbusier. I mean,
Yes.
it's the same mix of, interesting and perceptive and, powerful ideas with maybe some decisions that were made that are too rigid and too sort of overdetermined. How do you feel about the LEAD? You talked about LEAD ND, which is leadership in energy and environmental design for neighborhood development. And that's something that the CNU partnered on.
LEAD and LEAD ND are two different things. I mean, LEAD originally began as a measurement of energy performance.
Yeah.
Fine, you can measure energy performance.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing wrong with measuring the measurable, and there's nothing wrong with the measurable. It's just it isn't everything.
Mm-hmm.
And LEAD ND is overreaching and simplistic and silly in ways that it completely misses the complexity of urbanism and the complexity and nuance of place, and substitutes this sort of formulaic checklist as a measure of appropriateness. I think it's very destructive, very foolish, and ultimately goes nowhere positive.
I'm reminded of the phrase, not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted, right?
Well, I love that. I never heard that. That's terrific.
I'm not sure who said it, but it's
Oh, somebody smart said that. Yeah.
Yeah, and then maybe that's a example for LEAD ND and for some of the other things that you talk about in New Urbanism, which I think is a complicated mix of interesting and significant advances and mistakes, maybe, shall we say.
I just wanted to ask that when you're talking about leaving space for life and informality in a city, sometimes like we're looking at cities now which have become so programmed, and I think the concept of deprogramming is something that kind of comes to your mind. Is there any insight that you can give on deprogramming, or how to work of integrating more informality in a city, especially like a city like Stockholm? Any work happening on that note?
Programming and deprogramming is something that I think I associate more with landscape than with urbanism. And there's hyper-program. Actually, I saw something hilarious the other day. It was so funny. I'm trying to remember where it was. I have to place myself. I have this image of I remember what it is. In San Francisco, it's the replanning of a neighborhood park. And the replanning of the neighborhood park involved all the neighbors in a regular sort of populist, participatory, contemporary way of doing things. And it resulted in a drawing that had little circles and little ovals and little weird shapes with things written in them, which were the requests, the programmatic requests of each person who lived along this 4-block area of the park. And there must have been 400 little circles of requests of things. And then there's the built park with 400 little circles of requests of absolute chaos of urban space. A mess of populist, participatory, programmatic, good intentions. But I've never seen something so literally the record of a process of urban disintegration through hyperprogramming. And that's certainly something that exists. I don't think the public spaces of Stockholm are particularly programmed. They're beautiful sequences of space, streets and courts and parks and waterfront. That is splendid, but not hyper-programmed. You can do anything there.
One of the, Dan mentioned Christopher Alexander's paper, A City is Not a Tree, and there's a new paper by the sociologist Richard Sennett called The Open City, and it's very much in that spirit, that cities have this kind of fluidity and unprogrammed aspect to them. And what happens is they sort of evolve spaces that allow a lot of different programmatic things to happen when they need to happen, rather than, you know, sort of over-determining, as he puts it, all the different things that, well, I want this and it has to be here, and you end up with chaos when that happens, as Dan says in his example.
Well, it's had a big impact on landscape architecture. I call it the it's-a-bitsification of public space, you know, which is this sort of hyper-programmatic, a little bit for everybody. And you know, there's a space in San Francisco that's just completed, which is the new Transbay Park, which is part of this 60-story, incredible techno complex on top of a transit terminal. And although it is designed by Peter Walker, who's a remarkably gifted landscape architect, it is the itsy-bitsification of space, where a majestic space loses its majesty altogether in the accommodation of a sort of hyper-program.
How can we make today's architects aware of that they are working in a prison called modernist functionalism, and make them free? How to make them aware?
That's a very good question, and because it is a prison, and you see it so vividly in this city at the moment Stockholm fell out of love with itself, which was, what is the date, 1958, 1957? I mean, you all must know much more accurately than I when that happened. But it's a tragedy that happened, and that tragedy is writ large in a big section of the city. I myself feel trapped in the prison of modernism because that's what's in my hand. That's what I was trained to do, and I can do it fluently. I can't do anything else fluently. But I think that what I have tried to do is use the hand that produces modern architecture to produce a sense of historical continuity with the places around it. So I think that's possible. But unlike a student who, say, went to Notre Dame, where there's this sort of real schooling in traditional building craft, I never had that. And it's like language. There's a point in your life where you can't learn it, or you can't learn it very well. And I have not learned it very well, how to be anything but a modern architect. And I consider it a handicap.
Okay, we have one more there.
I have a couple of observations about, I haven't obviously read the book yet, but I really enjoyed the introduction, so thank you. First of all, my observation about love versus hope as two words. I kind of enjoy that, the freedom in those words, to some aspect of them both being positive and not going too far to like criminalize modernism in any way, in the aspect of that you view it or label it maybe as something a bit naive, but not as something malicious in the choice of the word hope, which is something that I find attractive and like brings me in as somebody who, I guess, like yourself, was also trained in a specific way in architecture school, and so that's a big positive for me. And on another kind of train of thought, I feel that the examples of your architecture that you showed, which I found very interesting, has given me a lot of thought, or also confusion about where I fall on the line of thinking about new urbanism and architecture, now that I follow these two trains of thought about what works as a beautiful piece of architecture, or what works well as a city or city fabric, or the surprise, or the love, as you just the love elements of the city that you sort of describe. And I guess this is adding to this kind of confusion in my view over this argument of what is good architecture and what is good cities. I don't know how to bring those two together.
I extract from what you just said a very interesting phrase, which is the criminalizing of modernism. And I don't criminalize modernity or modernism, which does not mean that modernism didn't do criminal things. And you know, that's maybe that's sophistry, but I think it's an important distinction.
But it's what you're doing in the book, isn't it? You're teasing out the baby from the bathwater, as I put it, and trying to say, you know, there are some things that we've learned and that are positive that we can take forward, right?
Doesn't mean the bathwater isn't dirty.
No, that's true. Absolutely. Incidentally, quick note, that quote about not everything that counts can be counted, that was a sociologist, William Bruce Cameron, if anybody's interested in him.
I'll take a small shot at the end. I'm thinking about when you show the pictures of San Francisco and rereading Florida now, the creative class and the urban crisis, and what's going on in places like San Francisco, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and so on. That was like a hopeful present you've shown, right? It was a hopeful present. There was low-income housing. There was the techies. A little. It should be much more, but they have not been obliterated. They're not gone. So it gives a little bit of hope within the whole paradigm, right? Do you see San Francisco? I mean, now the indicators are showing we have this urban crisis, the creative class is sort of eaten up most of it, and then there's a sort of a flee from the middle class from the cities, and not enough places for lower or poor classes. But how do you see the future of San Francisco with what you show?
San Francisco has a very strange pathology at the moment, which is this extraordinary wealth, extraordinary poverty, and just the ravages of drug culture and lack of mental health services, and the turning out of, which began with Ronald Reagan as governor of California, the substituting of nothing for mental hospitals. In Los Angeles, there's 58,000 homeless. In San Francisco, there's 7,500. The 7,500 are so much more visible in San Francisco than the scattered 58,000 in the vast area of Los Angeles. It's a daily presence. I mean, you confront this tragedy constantly. There's a young woman who's a very fine photographer who was working as one of our admins, and she produced a photo essay on San Francisco. And my favorite photograph of hers is the silhouette of a person wrapped in a blanket in a doorway with a sign. and the sign says Lexus, Bentley, Aston Martin, and the silhouette of this homeless person against this sign. And it was like the emblem of the city and its inequities. And on the one hand, is enormous vitality of this global industry, and then the wake of destruction and human tragedy that it leaves behind. And we're blessed to be able to build buildings that are as nice as we could conceive. What a great opportunity and a great fulfilling thing. The very night that we opened the one on the little baby high-rise, there was a homeless encampment at the front door. The day people moved in. So I have a slide that I use as a lecture slide, and I didn't include it here. It says, between 1922 and 1933, Frankfurt built 144,000 units of social housing. Vienna built 80,000 units. London, Paris built 200 and something thousand units. That under this current crisis, San Francisco produces 2,000 or 3,000 units a year. And the scale of social investment is so puny. In the midst of this prosperity.
This is maybe a bigger subject than our conversation, but to go to your point about modernity and the 20th century and the kind of model we've been using, I think that implicates modern economics, right? And modern economics, especially the sort of supply side theory that you just focus on the top of the pyramid, the tech guys, Silicon Valley, let them come into San Francisco, because everything is generating so much wealth that it's got to shower down to everybody else. Of course, what happens is it doesn't work. It creates greater inequality, and so we're struggling with that, aren't we?
And that's a very important part of the book, the last chapter. That's something that's maybe your most important message. And to younger generations, that you have to engage, this is not just a conversation topic, not just something to worry about, but something to integrate in your work as an architect and a planner, that you have two propositions, and in short I would say that they are like, you have to do, as an urbanist, as an architect, you have to do more, and you have to do it as part of building cities. Well,
the Romans got ready for the Ostrogoths. We need to get ready for after Trump.
That's a good final thought. Okay, so I think we'll leave it. Please give a hand, a warm applause to all three of our colleagues here.